All right. Everyone here? All right. My hope is we're going to try to figure out, we're going to read Hebrews 11. We're going to come to an understanding of what biblical faith is. You need a sheet. Max, okay, fine. We're going to come to a biblical understanding of faith, and it's a big understanding. So we're going to try to make it as concise as possible, but still kind of big, and so I get that. We're going to read Hebrews 11, pull out what it teaches us about faith, settle on a definition. Then we're going to talk about what biblical faith is not, some things that we see in our culture that kind of pass as biblical faith, and then how do you walk with students into biblical faith. So that's a little bit of what we're going to go into. And so I'm just going to read Hebrews 11. I'll read a couple verses at a time. I'm just going to try to point out what it's showing us about faith. And so if you want to underline those things, you can. If you want to stare at me during those things, you can. Whatever you feel. Hebrews 11, verse 1. Now faith is the assurance of things hoped for, the conviction of things not seen. For by it the people of old received their commendation. So the first few things we just see here in Hebrews 11 is that it defines faith as an assurance of things hoped for and a conviction of things not seen. And so really here we see faith kind of talked about in this idea of things. It says things hoped for, so it's almost like faith in an outcome or in an idea or in a belief. When we talk about faith in those kind of things, ideas, beliefs, outcomes, we use words like assurance. We're assured of this outcome, or we're convicted of this truth. When we're talking about faith in terms of a relationship, like faith in God, we use different words like trust, right? When you have faith in someone, you trust in who they are. And so I just wanted to set apart there that when we use assurance and conviction, it's generally in outcomes, beliefs, or ideas. Verse 2, for by it the people of old received their commendation. To commend someone is to say, you did right, or you did good, or you did well, right? To commend someone says, you did what's right. You did a good thing. You are righteous. And so what he's saying here in verse 2 is that we are commended by God. We are counted as right or righteous by God because of faith. That's how we get right with God, is through our faith. We're just going to keep going. Verse 3. By faith, we understand that the universe was created by the Word of God, so that what is seen was not made out of things that are visible. Verse 3 tells us that by faith we understand things. So faith gives us understanding. There are some things that we can understand through faith in God that we would not understand otherwise. Here specifically it says creation. You weren't there when the world was created. And so if you have faith in God and who He is, and who He says He is, and what He says He's done, you will understand things that you would not normally understand. God's going to share with you those things. We gain understanding through faith. Verse 4. By faith, Abel offered to God a more acceptable sacrifice than Cain, through which he was commended as righteous, God commending him by accepting his gifts. And through faith, though he died, he still speaks. So the other thing we learn about faith here is that faith makes things acceptable to God. Faith makes offerings and sacrifices acceptable to God. So if you guys remember the story in Genesis, Cain and Abel were brothers, and they both made a sacrifice to God, one of crops and one of animals. And Abel's sacrifice was accepted, and Cain's was rejected. And so what does Cain do? He kills his brother. As every good brother should, right? You like my brothers more than mine, I'll murder you. And so we don't really hear why. Like when you're reading that story, you're like, why didn't God accept Cain's? Like, why did He choose Abel? It almost feels like favoritism. But here in Hebrews we say God accepted Abel's sacrifice because it was done in faith. Abel trusted who God was, and he was willing to sacrifice. God, I trust you to do with this what's right. I trust that you are more worthy than this 10% that I'm giving you, or this offering that I'm giving you. Whereas Cain did it out of obligation. I'm supposed to give a sacrifice. There's no faith. There's no trust in it. There's no, God, I believe you're worth this. And that's why it was not accepted. So faith made his offering acceptable. Verse 5. By faith, Enoch was taken up so that he should not see death. And he was not found because God had taken him. Now before he was taken, he was commended as having pleased God. The next thing we learn about faith is that faith prompts God to act. Enoch had faith, and God took Enoch up. So God acted in response to Enoch's faith. faith prompts God to act. I know we're going quick, but we're in verse 6. And without faith, it's impossible to please him. For whoever would draw near to God must believe that he exists and rewards those who seek him. And so in 6, we learn that faith allows God to be pleased. That we can't please God if we're not doing things in faith. That's why Cain's sacrifice was not acceptable, because it wasn't done in faith. And there's some pretty hard struggles sometimes when we talk about that. That without faith, things aren't pleasing to God, because there's some things we see in our world that we think are good things. We think God would be pleased by them, even if they weren't done without faith. If I'm feeding the hungry, but I'm not doing it faithfully following God, is he pleased? The passage makes it seem like, no, if we're not living out of response to faith, God's not pleased. Why is that? He's saying if you're not trusting in who God is, if you're not believing in who he is and what he says he's going to do, no matter what you do for him, he's not going to be pleased by that. So here's an example that I gave last time, and it was a bad example, but it makes a point. If for Mother's Day, you get your mother flowers, but say, Mom, I give these to you, but I don't trust you, and I don't believe you're going to come through for me, how pleased is she going to be by that gesture? Not very, right? I'm going to do the right thing, but I don't have any trust in your character or who you say you are or what you're going to do, right? And so it's not just we do the right thing and God is pleased. There's this relational aspect to our faith. God is pleased by faith because he has to know that we are engaging with him in a relationship, that we trust who he is and what he's going to do. Last one, 7. By faith, Noah, being warned by God concerning the events as yet unseen, in reverent fear constructed an ark for the saving of his household. By this he condemned the world and became an heir of righteousness that comes by faith. So, 7, by faith, Noah constructed an ark. Faith leads to action. Faith leads to action. One of the things that has kind of happened in the church is maybe you'll see this division of faith, is that sometimes you'll hear, if you've read the book of James, you'll see, are we saved by faith or by works? Maybe you've heard that conversation of, do I have to do the right things in order to be saved? Do I have to have faith in the right things to be saved? And we've kind of divided what faith is. Because faith is not belief. I'm going to jump down for a minute and tell you that in James 2, 19, that's one of your blanks down there. It says, even the demons believe in God and shudder. The demons believe in God, but they don't have faith in God. They're not being saved, right? So belief is not faith. So we talk about faith and works. People think it's belief and works. And that's not what's going on. Real faith is any belief that leads to action. True faith is belief and action combined. Does that make sense? And it's really hard to say, and here's a bad example that I give all the time, but again, it makes a point, is that if I told you guys that this roof is structurally unsound, in any moment it's going to come crushing down, if you had faith in who I am and what I'm saying, you would be out of here in about 3 seconds, right? If you really believed it, if you had true faith, it would lead to action. You would not say, Carl, I wholeheartedly believe you, but I want to see what it feels like to take the ceiling, right? That's not what you would say. Real faith leads to action. And so I think in modern day, we've kind of separated them and said faith is belief and actions are separate, but that's not the biblical belief or understanding of faith. Faith is any belief that leads to action. If you're not acting, then I would question the belief, right? If you're not running out of the room, I'd question whether you believe that ceiling's going to fall. And so when we say that faith leads to action, it's one of the same. And as we talk about that, one of the best ways I've heard is talking about saving faith, in that is that we are saved by faith, and the works are evidence of our faith. And so we're not saved by works, but works are evidence to remind us we do believe. We are running out that we do have faith. So after we've read all those things and noted in Hebrews 11 all these different aspects of faith, what does it teach us about faith? I tried to construct a sentence there that kind of condenses it for us. It says, biblical faith is confidence in the person and the promises of Jesus. Biblical faith is confidence in the person and the promises of Jesus, and who he is and what he says he's going to do. I believe who he is and what he says he's going to do. This faith, it engages and pleases the heart of God. When we trust God, we are engaged in a relationship with him, and it pleases him. And it leads us to understanding action and prompting God to respond. It leads us, we're going to understand things, we're going to do things, and we're going to prompt God to act in our world. Because we trust in him, we're going to ask him to do things here, right? If I trust God that he's with me and he wants to redeem things and he wants to restore creation, then as I'm walking and I'm trying to love people around me, I'm going to ask him to start working in the lives of the people around me. I'm going to prompt him to act. And so this is faith for us. Biblical faith is confidence in the person and the promise of Jesus. It engages and pleases the heart of God while leading us to understanding, action, and prompting God to respond. So what is not biblical faith? So it's not an intellectual claim. It's not just that I believe something. That's what we talked about in James 2. It's even the demons believe. Faith is not just believing. And sometimes in our culture, faith has been simplified to that. And so some students, and I'm sure some of your students, think that they have faith in Jesus because they believe that he existed. And maybe that's as far as their faith goes. And I think belief is sufficient. And that's not true. That's not biblical faith. It's not just a belief. It's not just a claim. Think about how easy that is just to say, yeah, I believe that. That's not what God requires of his people. And so it's not just an intellectual claim. It's also, faith is not a set of rules. That's the other misconception we see a lot in our culture, is faith is just a set of rules to live by. It teaches us how to be moral people, right? It teaches us how to be good people. And if we obey these rules, then we get heaven. It's a cause and effect kind of transaction. We do these things, we get this reward. That is not what the Bible says. You see this in the interaction with the rich young ruler. It's there in Mark 10. The rich young ruler comes to Jesus and says, "What must I do to inherit eternal life?" And he starts listing the commandments. He says, you should love your father and your mother. You should do this. You should do that. And then the rich young ruler says, "I've done all of those things. That rule set, I've accomplished." And then God says, "All right, well, go and sell all your possessions." And he left sad. There's something beyond the rule set here. Faith is not just a set of rules to fulfill and get a reward out of it. It's bigger than that. And some of our students have kind of whittled down our faith to, if I follow these rules, I'll be a good person. Then God owes me heaven because I've done what he has asked of me. And it's really sad because in that mindset, it's subtle, we don't realize it. In that mindset of, if I follow these rules, I've done what's good, God owes me heaven. In that religious mindset, we have put God in our debt. I've done what he has required. He owes me salvation. If there's anyone who owes anyone anything, it's we owe God, right? It's a subtle works-based salvation. I've done what's required. He owes me salvation in here. And that is not what faith is about. It's not about rule set. It's not an intellectual claim. Faith is a relationship where we trust in the person and the promises of Jesus, and we live out of that. Before I go any further, is there anything on your minds as we talk through that? Any questions, any thoughts, anything that you're thinking that you guys want to share with the group? Talked about what faith is, what faith isn't, maybe what you see in your students.
So, addressing this without discouraging, if that misunderstanding you just explained exists, explaining this without discouraging them to where they're, wow, well, I might give up. So I don't want to have that outcome.
Yeah.
So that seems like a delicate balance.
Yeah, it is. Yeah, it's not an easy conversation.
No.
And so, are you talking about either one of them or both of them?
Well, just the general idea that assumptions in the context of our society are being made.
Mm-hmm.
As you said, that if you're a good person and then you are accomplishing what you're supposed to, you're not getting in trouble with your parents, you're doing okay at school, you're coming to fathom, so hey, you're on the right path.
Yeah.
So making that ring true to clarify you're in the ballpark.
Yeah.
But
yeah.
you're not playing the right game. I mean.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah.
So I guess that's just a more general. And I'm thinking of my boys. So
yeah. Because you don't want to say, "Hey, you've been doing it wrong, and you're really bad at this." Yeah.
Yeah. Because there are moments of encouragement just from conversations we have in the midst of the cutting up, because we've got a really good cut up group. But there are moments that I think that there's some progress being made, but it's kind of glacial.
Yeah, as are relationships. Relationships in general are glacial. You become best friends over time and stuff like that. For that, I think the best way to engage with students in that conversation and say, hey, you're not quite there yet, without discouraging them, is you have to show them how much greater what's right is. Because you want them to be in awe of what's really true and to aspire to that instead of to be frustrated with how wrong they are. Because you don't want them to live in shame of, I've been doing this wrong, or I've been trying to put God in my debt, or I've been trying to just get these rule sets. You want them to say, oh, wait, you mean this relationship can be more exciting and fulfilling than I ever thought or imagined? I want to pursue that. And so, it's hard. And there's different conversations in that. And some of it, not every student is ready for. Sometimes not recommending this, meaning sometimes some of these students, they're willing to follow Jesus because they think the barrier to follow Jesus is so low. Oh, all I have to do is believe. I'm in. Like, hey, that was easy. I said I believed, and now I'm a Christian. And some of these students, I've had students who say, hey, I want to get baptized, and I talk with them about their faith. So tell me about your faith. And they'll say, I've believed in Jesus all my life. I say, all right, great. Well, are you willing to die to yourself? Are you willing to give up and sacrifice for other people's well-being so they might get to know Jesus? Are you willing to put others' needs before yourself? And you almost a little bit discourage them to say, hey, this is a little bit more of a commitment than you think, because if they're going to commit to it, you want them to understand what they're committing to it. Because otherwise, I guess my biggest fear is that some of our students would get to the end of the race and think they have ran it well, only to realize they were running a different race the whole time. And so for them to say, hey, I want you to know what you're getting into. Like, count the cost before you jump into this. And that's a delicate conversation as well. Like, there's different scenarios in both of those. Any other thoughts?
I think if you want, and this is maybe too much for a 12th but senior to acknowledge, but everyone's relationship with God is different. And right now, your children and those children are just seeing your relationship with God, Paul's relationship with God, and their parents' relationship with God. And it's hard to wrap your mind around, but that's going to be different from my relationship with God. So like, it's going to be different than their best friend, it's going to be different than their brother and sister. Like, maybe if you could just be like, this is the one thing in your life you truly get to own. Is your relationship with God. Nothing really, not your clothes, not your car, whatever. You get to own this thing.
Yeah.
I don't know if frame it to them like that, if that will. I can tell you that our age girls would never. That's way too young. That's a hard. I mean, I was an adult before I sorted that out.
Yeah. Any other thoughts? We're going to jump into the next section. All right, so now we understand what this idea of biblical faith is. How do we walk with students into biblical faith? How do we get there? First thing you say there, where do I start? Where do you start as a leader when you're going to walk with students into biblical faith? You kind of have to have a sense of where they are. You kind of have to do an evaluation and say, where are you, student? If you're going to walk with them anywhere, you have to realize where they are and then where you want to go and get there. And so you kind of have to evaluate that, and it's really hard because most students have never really had to ever articulate where they are in their faith. Never really thought about faith as a growth process, and so it's hard for them to talk about where they started or where they are now or where they have to go. And especially younger students. If you go and talk to an 8th grade boy and say, hey, where are you in your faith? They would say, here? They just don't get it, And even when you ask them, like asking is right, but even when you ask students, you can't fully buy into their answer because, one, they probably have never evaluated it before, so they're not coming from a depth of self-evaluation at first. And two, they've never had to articulate it. And so I guess I've had someone say before, a lot of times younger students they call it playing tapes. They've heard these phrases before, and they've locked in these phrases, and they'll repeat them out of their mouth. And so I've heard this person say this, I'm just going to repeat this phrase. I don't fully know what it means, but this is what I've heard. It's yeah, I'm in love with Jesus, or yeah, I'll follow Jesus. They don't know what following Jesus means, but that's where they're at. You know what I'm saying? And so to ask them is right. As you're evaluating where they're at, to ask them is right, but don't put your full stock in what they say because they don't know how to articulate these things yet. They haven't probably been asked these things a whole bunch. And maybe as you continue to ask them, they'll learn to articulate these things and you'll get clear. One of the best ways to observe or to evaluate where a student is in their faith is just to watch. And a lot of times you can hear it in their language. And so to ask them, you can hear it when you talk to them about friendships. How are they treating their friends? How do they speak about their parents? How are they talking about their future? When they're at church, how engaged are they in the Word? Or how much are they caring about their brother and sister? Like a lot of times, you're going to learn more about the student's faith by watching them and listening well than you will by talking to them. Because again, they've never learned to talk about it, so they can't tell you where they're at. And so that's a hard thing to do. And sometimes it's subtle. We talked in the last section of, we're talking about things in terms of relationships. If we're talking about like how the relationship is with God, how do you understand where the relationship is? I kind of see it as like how students talk about relationships with each other, especially like opposite gender relationships. Like if I ask, a boy, what do you think of Susie over there? He's like, she's annoying. She always tries to do this. He probably doesn't have a great relationship with her. Or, she's so fun. She likes to play cards with me. Or, Susie is really cool. And sometimes it's like subtle differences in tone or in action and how they relate to it. You have to understand their relationship. And so sometimes just hearing how they talk about God, the subtle word choices, tells you about their relationship, tells you how much they treasure their relationship with God, tells you if they're spending time with God. Maybe it's their word choices when they talk about serving others. Is it an obligatory? I had to go do this. Or it was so cool to go sit by this person. They're like, all right, you know what I'm saying? So you can kind of hear the subtleties. It's a really intangible. It's kind of an art, and every student's different. And so once you figure out one student, you have to learn to figure out another student. But if you're going to figure out how to walk with them, you kind of have to get some sense of where they're at. When we talk about faith, I kind of divide it into three parts as you're going to walk with them into biblical faith. There's an understanding aspect of faith. What do they understand about God? Or what do they understand about what God is calling them to? There's this relational aspect of, do I know God? Am I walking with God? Am I praying with God? And then there's just living it out. There's this action, okay? Because some students have the understanding. They know who God is and what he's calling them to. They have this relationship, but they're doing nothing, right? Or maybe they're going all the church trips, they're doing everything, but they don't really understand God or they don't really pursue him in a relationship. And so there's kind of three aspects that as you're evaluating, you want to understand, or you want to evaluate, what do they understand? How is their relationship with God? Is there a relationship there? And are they living it out? And that kind of helps you figure out, how do I walk with him into faith? Question number 3 there. What if I don't know? Meaning, what if I'm trying to walk with them into faith and they ask questions that I don't know? That's okay. You don't have to know. And sometimes it's better that you don't know. Like when they ask you questions, sometimes the biggest lesson that you can give a student is being humble enough to say, I don't know, and being courageous enough to model them how to search. Like most of our students, if they don't know something, they want to give up. But if you can show them it's worth searching for answers together, that's huge. Teach them to be humble and to search with people. They can model. Especially for men, I think we have this pride of like, oh, we know things or we can do things or whatever. But to model as a man of, hey, you know what? That's a great question. I don't know that. But what's more important than me looking smart is us finding the answers together and you knowing that your question matters and that I'm with you in this. And so sometimes I think that's our biggest opportunity there is to say, I don't know, and I'm going to do it with you. I'm going to model searching with you. The last one is, am I there myself? When you're walking with students into biblical faith, there's some things where you say, hey, I'm not quite there myself yet either. And it's hard to lead students into those areas. You're saying, that student isn't yet able to trust God with their future, and I'm also not yet able to trust God with my future. What you have to make sure in your heart is you're not supposed to be, faith is a process. Your relationship with the Lord is a process. Sanctification is a process. You're not going to be at the right spot every time. But there's a difference between that you're not there and you're not willing to go there. Does that make sense? God doesn't call you to be perfect. He calls you to be willing to follow him. And so even when you're not sure, are you willing to trust him to go there? And again, modeling that is super important. To say, hey, I don't yet trust God with that either, and I know it's scary, but I want to too, and maybe we can go there together. is a huge conversation with them. Any questions or thoughts as we went through that section? Anything in your head? Walking with students in biblical faith? How do you evaluate them? Or
something that I was always told was like the third question, what if I don't know, would be to ask the student, what do you think? Because that gets to why they're asking the question. And
yeah.
understanding maybe more, it's not the question that they want answered, but some more knowledge.
Yeah, that's a great thing. Or maybe they're asking because they're like,
I want to test the new leader and see what they.
Yeah, or maybe they're concerned to maybe they're doing something wrong and they're trying to ask a question to see am I a bad person? But they're not asking that question. You're right. You're trying to figure out what are their motives behind asking the question. It gives you a lot of knowledge about who they are and where they're at. That's a good point. Any other thoughts or questions from that section?
I'm just remembering when I was little, and I think it's probably similar for kids too, that when they do have faith conversations with friends that don't attend the same church or even the same denomination, they usually try to compare what does it mean to be XYZ denomination or XYZ religion even. And I was confronted by someone from another denomination that if you did not do these 7 things, you were not going to heaven.
Yeah.
And it's hard to have a response for that.
Yeah.
And so because the Methodist Church in general and other denominations of Christianity focus more on the relationship with Jesus, which I agree with, it leaves us kind of at a loss to have a response for that. And I just wonder, have you ever been given a tip or something we could tell those kids?
Yeah.
Like a comeback. Like how can they feel confident when they're faced with someone who says, or even if it's steps like, even in the Catholic Church, you go through this, class, you go through that class, and do we have a response as Methodists or just Christians in general that we can tell these kids?
Yeah. That's a big question.
Sorry.
There's a couple of different facets. And that's a great question, though. There's a couple of different facets to that. One is, I would say 98% of our students, if they're encountered by someone from another faith asking them about their faith, they're asking them to defend their faith, most of them would not be able to do it. They'd say, why do you believe that? And you'd have a few who are more mature than most who'd be able to give some sort of answer. And so there's not, for them, there's not like a go-to response. For them, I would almost ask them to okay, if you're really interested in having that dialogue with that person, I think you can model the same response of, that's a really great question, and I really want to know the answer because that's an important question. Will you give me time to go seek and search answers because I need those answers for myself? And can we have a conversation about it? Because I think sometimes those conversations are antagonistic of who can win or who's more right in their faith. If we can turn those into a conversation that's genuine, because if we were to be honest, we don't want to be right for the sake of our pride. We want to be right because this is reality, right? If Christianity is not true, I don't want to argue it into truth, right? That's not in service to me, and that's not in service to anyone else. But if Christianity is true, I want to know it and love it and believe it and be able to share it with other people because it offers a lot. And so I think if we can turn the tables from confrontation or argumentation or winning into a real conversation of, that's a great question, let's figure that out together, because now you're inviting them into searching about your faith. I think it's a cool conversation. The other thing, this is hard to do as small group leaders, it's maybe easier to do as parents. Southern Christianity, American Christianity, we don't do church well. As people, not as the church. I mean, probably as a church too. But as people, we don't do church well. When you go to school, think about how intensely people are listening and they're taking notes and they're wanting to memorize this because they've got stuff coming up and tests and their future depends on it. Most of our students, they come in and they're not saying, oh man, I can't wait to learn this about God. They're not taking notes. They're not going home and looking at it or studying. You know what I mean? There's not this internal desire of, I just have to know the heart and the character of God and what His will is for my life. And so it's almost that heart that we have to develop. And so, we talk about programs or what do we as a Methodist church have to offer. We offer programs all the time. And for me, it's not a program issue. It's how do we get to the heart of these students? and it's hard, as you guys experience as leaders. You guys have probably, really only an hour, hour and a half with them once a week, and you have that with 8 of them, right? Like, it's not like you get one-on-one time with them for an hour and a half. So to develop that heart is hard. And so that's why a lot of times we say, if you want to start speaking at the heart level with them, you need those one-on-one conversations with them. It's a lot easier to do at the parental level where you see them at home. And I'm naive as a parent because I know at home you have just as much going on as you do an 8-person small group, right? Like, it's not like you're sitting around at home doing nothing. So I get that too. But all that to say is I think we're not missing a program component. I feel like if we were to take notes every Sunday morning in church about, even if it's just once a month, and we studied those notes and we knew those notes and we treasured those notes, that we were learning about the heart and the character of God, I believe we'd be way more prepared out in the world if we just took church seriously and did church well. So I don't know what you guys can do to cultivate that heart, but I think that's our mission. Does that speak a little bit to where you're going?
And I know it's a fine line because, especially these days, they worry even more than I did growing up about offending somebody.
Mm-hmm.
And so, on the one hand, they don't want to necessarily be brave to broadcast what it is they believe.
Yeah.
But when they are confronted with somebody who is in their face
Mm-hmm.
about, how do you know you're going to go to heaven? Because I know
Yeah.
I've had those conversations, and I know the students have them. And we've had a few since we've been in class that,
Yeah.
they get easily offended by, some people in their school that are really giving them a hard time about their faith.
Yeah.
That might be a great topic for you guys to offer one Sunday. Like,
Mm-hmm.
how do we defend our faith
Mm-hmm.
when we go out?
Yeah.
We talk about sharing it.
Mm-hmm.
We talk about what it means to believe. But,
Mm-hmm.
there are times they're called to question.
Yeah.
And so maybe we need to have something in our back pocket that, and not just necessarily to say, well, I'm better than you, or
Yeah.
anything like that. Just to say, this is how I know I'm confident in what I
Mm-hmm.
believe and why I believe it, and I'd love to have a conversation with you about it, but I'm not
Yeah.
going to get in an argument with you.
Yeah.
And I think those are great things for kids to have.
They need those. That's part of why, I'm kind of excited for them to have those discussions and for them to be caught off guard because they don't realize their need for answers until they realize they don't have any.
Yeah.
Like, you don't realize learn to fight until you get beat up. That kind of deal. I'm not telling you no one should fight. I'm not. But their need needs to be exposed. They need to understand their need of. Most of our students have a surface level of understanding. They've accepted all these surface level facts about their faith, and they don't realize that they're not based off of true understanding. Right? Like, I used to do this with my chord a lot of times. We would start chord off, and I would just ask them kind of an attacking question about the faith, and I would play devil's advocate and say, hey, you guys believe that the Word of God is written by God? Like, do you believe it's really God's Word? Say, yeah. It's like, why? Because it is? Great. I disagree. Convince me. Well, doesn't it say it somewhere? I don't know. You tell me. And then they're like, oh, you mean? I was like, I can tell you lots of people who say it's not. And their need is exposed. They're like, okay, I don't know. And then they'll say, well, doesn't it in 2 Timothy 3:16 it says Scripture is God breathed? It's like, yeah, but what about the Bible was convened at a council of Nicaea in 325 AD? A group of human beings put it together. What about the books that didn't make it into the Bible? And they are now And so sometimes what I'm realizing in this is questions are sometimes their most powerful tool to learning, and sometimes they don't know how to ask questions. Sometimes it's our job to teach them to ask questions. So sometimes when you're in groups and you realize they don't actually understand what's going on, sometimes it's fun. I enjoy it. Sometimes it's fun to flip the tables on them a little bit and say, hey, you guys believe that God's worth trusting? Yeah, of course. Why? Because he loves us. Well, why does he let bad stuff happen? If he really loved you, would he let you cry? You know what I'm saying? Like, I'm not saying those are right questions or whatever, but after they find answers to that, their belief is no longer on a hollow foundation. They have these answers that support their belief, and they can claim it and say, I believe this, and I know it's true, even more so than when I started. I'm ranting, I'm sorry. Anything else before we go on? If you guys need to leave, it's time. You can leave.
I was just going to say,
yes?
with one of my children, I've encountered some of the being asking Christ in her heart because she was afraid of hell.
Yeah.
And I want her to know God is a loving God. But yes, hell is scary.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
And finding that balance with not making sure the faith is solid and not just out of fear.
Yeah. That's a hard balance, because a lot of people treat faith as like fire insurance. Of like, just in case I'm gonna believe because I don't want to be wrong and go to the bad place. That's hard, because you're right. You want them to hold on to faith because they treasure who God is and what He's saying to do, instead of being fearful of what might help. Yeah. So I've probably got about 10 minutes left, and so I'm gonna continue going on. If you need to leave, you can quietly grab your stuff and go. That's fine. If you want to stay for 10 minutes, you're welcome to stay. I'm gonna try to speed through the rest. I won't be offended like you all. Continuing. We just finished. How do I walk with my student into biblical faith? What are some common questions and struggles? So I kind of have 6 things down here as I've talked to students. What are the things they often question or say to me that tells me that they're struggling with their faith? The first one I often get is, I don't know if I believe. They'll say, Carl, I'm struggling with my faith. I'll say, all right, tell me what's going on. No, I don't know if I believe. All right, like, why don't you know if you can believe? I don't know. I just don't know if I believe. And they just don't, like, it's vague. I'm just unsure, and I don't know what to do about it. It's like, well, is it like, are there contradictions? Does it seem impractical? Yeah, I don't know. And so you're going to encounter that. It's like you want to help, but you just don't know what to do because they don't even know what they're struggling with. And I'm sure you see that in students. And so sometimes what you just need to do is you just need to start somewhere. You just need to guess and say, all right, well, we can talk about maybe the history of the faith. Maybe we can talk about, did Jesus actually exist? Maybe we can talk about biblical contradictions. We'll start somewhere and we'll try some things, and we'll mess up 3 times, but maybe on the 4th time you'll find something that sparks you and you say, this is it. And so you're not going to hurt them by making them read the Bible or ask questions. And so don't feel like just because you don't know where it's at, you're going to go wrong. You're not being a bad person. Just start somewhere and try. Number 2, there are intellectual struggles. Sometimes students will hear about biblical contradictions. They'll say things like, my friend told me that the genealogy in Matthew 1 is different than the genealogy in Luke, and why are there 2 different genealogies about Jesus? Shouldn't you have come from the same place? The Bible's contradicting itself. Or, why are there 2 creation accounts? In Genesis 1, it says the earth was created this way, and then Genesis 2, there's a different creation of Adam being formed from the ground and stuff like that. And so they have this biblical contradiction idea. And a lot of times when I interact with the common biblical contradictions, they're not so much contradictions as in I don't have enough information yet. Meaning, there's not 2 creation accounts. There's 1 creation account. One is more specific and at a different kind of angle than the other. One is a holistic, here's how everything was created and filled, and then this is specifically to human beings, how human was created. Or the genealogies. One is from a patriarchal kind of view, and the other one's from another set. So a lot of times those aren't necessarily contradictions, and you just need to walk with them and say, hey, I'm glad that you have this contradiction and you're confused about it. Let's look more into it. And a lot of times you'll find things there. Again, you don't have to know the answer. You just have to be willing to explore with them. 3 is science and biblical reason. They see science, a lot of them, as opposed to biblical reason. They say it's science versus religion, not science and religion. And that's kind of crept into our culture, is that science is what's true. We've empirically observed it and tested it or whatever. And religion is not true at all. We haven't tested it or observed it. We're just making it up, and we believe in a bunch of fairies. And they're opposing each other. Whereas I truly believe that science, when right, is the explanation of how God has created things to be. Science is something that's the detailed explanation of how God works and how He's created the world things. Just because the Bible doesn't say anything about gravity doesn't mean we don't believe in gravity. I'm pretty sure almost all Christians believe in gravity, right? And I believe that science explains the brilliancy of God to create things to be held to the earth instead of floating around in space, right? And so a lot of times these students see science as against religion. And so that's something that we have to deal with. And there's generally the common point where we see it as opposing is in the issue of creation and evolution. And there's a lot of different theories that allow those to coexist. It's interesting, and I almost don't want to say this because I'm like 60% sure it's true. I want to say the person who first documented the Big Bang Theory was a Catholic priest. And so we see that as a scientific theory, but it has its roots in religion. And I kind of myself agree. I'm like, oh, when I see Genesis say, let there be light, I was like, sounds like it could be a Big Bang, right? Like, I can see science kind of expanding upon Scripture and these things. And so sometimes they just need someone to walk with them in those things as well. Number 4, another common struggle or question that students have is cultural intolerance. It's becoming more and more popular for the world to critique and really kind of demonize religion. It's, why would you believe that? Why would you even go there? Why are you so dumb? And so because kids feel like it's unpopular to believe, they don't even want to go there. They don't even want to consider it. They feel like they're going to be shamed for it. And so that's one of the struggles your students might encounter is everyone on my sports thing thinks it's dumb, and so I don't even want to really give it a consideration. I don't want to be ostracized or left out because of that. Number 5, a common struggle with the faith is that they were let down by the church. And there's 2 ways this has happened. They were let down by the church, meaning they were hurt in relationship, or they were disappointed in experience. Meaning sometimes kids have a struggle with the faith because they've gone to the church and they've been hurt in a relationship. You know, someone was mean to me, and if that's a person's a Christian, he's supposed to be like God, I want nothing to do with God. Or I got in a fight with a kid, and the leader was mean to me, and I want nothing to do with that faith. I've been hurt by someone who's related to that faith, and I no longer want any part in that faith. The other way that you can be hurt by the church or let down by the church is an experience and say, the church says it's supposed to be a welcoming family, someone who loves everybody, someone who values everyone, people who are steeped in prayer and love the Word. And I went there, nobody loved me. These people didn't really seem to care about God or about praying or whatever. And so there's ways that you're let down in a relationship, and there's ways that you let down an experience of, I told it was supposed to be like this, and it was nothing like that. And so you might see that in some of your students. Recently, I've kind of caught a strand of people in our society who have been let down more so by experience, and they've kind of gone beyond Christianity because of that. They say, Christianity promises to be a spiritual group of people trying to bring the kingdom of God, but all I see is people who are about their rules, about right and wrong and judging people. And so there's got to be something beyond Christianity, something bigger there. And so they want to go to other religions because Christianity didn't give them the experience that was promised. Last one is a common struggle. It's the problem of evil, which is, why do bad things happen to good people? Does God really exist? Because if he did, why would he let this happen to my family? Why would he let this take place in the world? So those are all. I tried to come up with the things I think that you'll see most prevalent in your students. There's a lot of great ways to search with them through all of those things. And the journey with them is priceless. It's so good. And there's a lot of good ways to walk through that with them. And so if any of you guys encounter these things and don't know where to go and you want to sit and talk about it, I would love to give you some thoughts or things I've seen with students that have helped. But really just engaging with them and making them search is great. I remember I sat down with a student. There's a student last year who struggled with belief, and we went to Waffle House once a week for 6 weeks, and I gave him something different. I think the first time we said, all right, let's talk about the question is there even a God? I said, all right, your job is, we're going to talk about it here, but your job is to go home and research on the internet, only helpful places, is there a God? I want you to read 3 websites that say there is a God and 3 websites that say there isn't a God. And we're just going to have a conversation about it. And so I made them do the searching, and we came back and we talked about it. And so the next time I said, all right, well, we've got an understanding of if there's a God. Now, the second question is Jesus God? Right? And so let's talk about did Jesus even exist? So go and research now. Give me 2 articles that say Jesus did exist and 2 that he didn't. And let's talk about those, and we'll go through that. And so sometimes it's just pointing them in the right direction. And you coming back and saying, I've also looked at this. I've also got helpful responses. So you don't have to know anything. You just have to be willing to go search with them and lead them to places. And if it ever feels like it goes above your head, welcome to the club. but you've got us here for help. I would love to walk with you guys in that.